Imagine this. You wake up one morning, the sun spilling through your curtains, the world outside humming with its usual rhythm. But as you rise, you notice something that wasn't there before. A shadow. Not the kind cast by the furniture or the trees outside, but a shadow that clings to you, moving when you move, stopping when you stop. It's faint at first, almost imperceptible, but as the days pass, it grows darker, more defined. You try to shake it off, to outrun it, but no matter where you go, whether into the brightest sunlight or the deepest night, it follows. It's always there, a silent companion, a reminder of something you can't quite name. Now imagine this. The shadow isn't outside of you. It's within you. It's the part of yourself you've been running from, the part you've buried under layers of distraction, ambition, and noise. It's the weight of your unspoken fears, your unmet desires, your unresolved regrets. It's the echo of every what if, and if only, that haunts the edges of your mind. And here's the paradox. The more you try to escape it, the more it grows. The more you ignore it, the louder it becomes. What if this shadow isn't your enemy? What if it's the key to understanding who you truly are? What if, instead of running from it, you turn to face it, not with fear, but with curiosity? What would it say to you? What would it reveal about the life you've built, the choices you've made, the person you've become? This is not just a story about a shadow. This is a story about you. About the parts of yourself you've disowned, the truths you've avoided, the life you've been too afraid to live. It's a story about what happens when you stop running and start listening. But beware, once you see the shadow for what it truly is, there's no going back. The question is, are you ready to face it? The shadow is not a new concept. Carl Jung called it the dark side of the psyche, the repository of all the traits, desires, and impulses we reject or suppress. It's the part of us we deem unacceptable, the part we exile to the unconscious mind in our quest to fit into society's mold. But here's the catch: the shadow doesn't disappear. It lingers, festering in the depths of our psyche, influencing our thoughts, emotions, and actions in ways we don't fully understand. Why does this happen? Why do we create this shadow in the first place? The answer lies in the tension between who we are and who we think we should be. From the moment we're born, we're bombarded with expectations from our parents, our teachers, our culture. We're told to be kind but assertive, ambitious but humble, confident but not arrogant. These contradictions force us to compartmentalize ourselves, to hide the parts of us that don't align with the ideal. Philosophers have long grappled with this duality. Friedrich Nietzsche spoke of the abyss that stares back at us when we gaze too long into it. Jean-Paul Sartre warned of bad faith, the act of lying to ourselves to avoid the discomfort of our own freedom. Viktor Frankl, in his exploration of meaning, argued that we often suppress our true desires to conform to societal norms, only to find ourselves trapped in a life that feels hollow and unfulfilled. The shadow, then, is not just a personal problem, it's a societal one. It's the product of a world that values conformity over authenticity, masks over vulnerability. And yet, the more we try to bury our shadow, the more it seeps into our lives. It manifests as anxiety, as self-sabotage, as a lingering sense of emptiness. It's the voice that whispers, "This isn't you," even as you climb the ladder of success. It's the ache you feel when you look in the mirror and realize you don't recognize the person staring back. But what if the shadow isn't the enemy? What if it's a mirror, reflecting the parts of ourselves we've lost along the way? What if, by facing it, we could reclaim those lost parts and become whole again? The journey is not easy. It requires courage, honesty, and a willingness to confront the uncomfortable. But the alternative is far worse: a life lived in the half-light, forever haunted by the shadow you refuse to see. The question now is, what lies beneath the surface of your shadow? And what would it mean to bring it into the light? The shadow doesn't just live in the recesses of your mind, it shapes your reality. It influences the choices you make, the relationships you form, the way you see the world. It's the reason you feel a pang of envy when a friend succeeds, even as you congratulate them. It's the source of the inexplicable anger that flares up during an argument, disproportionate to the issue at hand. It's the voice that tells you you're not good enough, no matter how much you achieve. Cognitive biases play a role here. Confirmation bias, for instance, ensures that you only see evidence that supports your self-image, while ignoring anything that contradicts it. The shadow thrives in these blind spots, distorting your perception of reality. You might believe you're pursuing your dreams, but are you? Or are you chasing someone else's idea of success, driven by a fear of failure or rejection? Neurologically, the shadow is rooted in the amygdala, the brain's fear center. When you encounter something that threatens your self-image, a criticism, a failure, a reminder of your imperfections, the amygdala triggers a fight or flight response. This is why facing the shadow feels so terrifying. It's not just an intellectual exercise. It's a physiological reaction. Your body, your mind, your very sense of self are wired to avoid it. Culturally, the shadow is reinforced by a society that values positivity and productivity above all else. We're encouraged to look on the bright side, to stay strong, to keep moving forward. But in doing so, we deny the full spectrum of human experience. We suppress our grief, our anger, our fear, thinking they make us weak. But these emotions don't disappear, they fester, poisoning our relationships, our work, our sense of self. The consequences are profound. On a personal level, the shadow leads to a fragmented identity. You become a collection of masks, each one designed to hide a different part of yourself. You might be successful, admired, even loved, but deep down, you feel like an imposter. On a societal level, the shadow fuels division and conflict. When we refuse to acknowledge our own darkness, we project it onto others, seeing in them the flaws we can't bear to face in ourselves. But here's the twist: the shadow also holds the key to transformation. It's the gateway to self-awareness, to authenticity, to a life lived in alignment with your true self. The journey is not easy. It requires confronting the parts of yourself you've spent a lifetime avoiding. But the rewards are immeasurable. The question is, what would it take to stop running from your shadow? What would it mean to turn and face it, not as an enemy, but as a teacher? And what might you discover about yourself in the process? Breaking free from the shadow is not about defeating it, it's about integrating it. This is the radical shift in perspective that changes everything. Instead of seeing the shadow as a threat, you begin to see it as a guide, a mirror, a source of untapped potential. This is not a passive process. It's an act of rebellion against the forces, both internal and external, that have kept you fragmented. The first step is awareness. You must become an observer of your own mind, noticing the thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that arise from the shadow. When you feel a surge of jealousy, ask yourself, what part of me feels threatened? When you lash out in anger, ask, what am I really defending? This is not about judgment, it's about curiosity. You're not trying to fix yourself, you're trying to understand yourself. Next, you must confront the stories you've been telling yourself. These are the narratives that shape your identity. I'm not good enough, I don't deserve love, I have to be perfect to be accepted. These stories are not truths. They are constructs, shaped by your experiences and reinforced by your shadow. To break free, you must challenge them. Ask yourself, who would I be without this story? What would I do if I weren't afraid? This is where the work of thinkers like Carl Jung and Viktor Frankl becomes invaluable. Jung believed that the shadow contains not only our darkest impulses, but also our greatest potential. By integrating the shadow, we reclaim the parts of ourselves we've disowned, becoming more whole, more authentic. Frankl, on the other hand, emphasized the importance of meaning. When we align our lives with our deepest values, the shadow loses its power over us. We no longer need to run from ourselves because we've found something greater to live for. Practical tools can aid this process. Journaling, for instance, allows you to externalize your thoughts and emotions, making them easier to examine. Meditation helps you cultivate the awareness needed to observe your shadow without being consumed by it. Therapy provides a safe space to explore your inner world with the guidance of a professional. But perhaps the most powerful tool is simply this: the willingness to be vulnerable. To admit that you're afraid, that you're flawed, that you don't have all the answers. This is the ultimate act of rebellion, not against others, but against the part of yourself that insists on perfection. It's the moment you realize that your shadow is not a monster, it's a wounded child, begging for your attention. The question now is, what would it look like to embrace your shadow? To stop running from it and start listening to it? And what might you discover about yourself and the world when you do? Here is the ultimate truth. The shadow is not separate from you. It is you. It is the part of you that you've been too afraid to acknowledge, too ashamed to embrace. But in that acknowledgement, in that embrace, lies the key to your liberation. The shadow is not a curse, it is a gift. It is the mirror that shows you who you truly are, stripped of the masks and the pretenses. When you stop running from your shadow, something extraordinary happens. You begin to see it not as a source of fear, but as a source of power. The qualities you once rejected, your anger, your vulnerability, your imperfection, become the very things that make you whole. Your anger becomes a force for justice, your vulnerability a bridge to connection, your imperfection a reminder of your humanity. This is the paradox of the shadow. By facing it, you transcend it. You realize that the darkness you've been running from is not something to be feared, but something to be understood. It is the soil from which your growth springs, the fire that forges your strength. Without it, you would be incomplete, a half-formed version of yourself. This realization is not just personal, it is universal. When you integrate your shadow, you begin to see the world differently. You recognize that everyone has a shadow, that everyone is struggling with their own fears, their own insecurities, their own unspoken truths. This recognition fosters empathy, compassion, and a deeper connection to others. It dissolves the barriers that separate us, revealing the shared humanity that lies beneath. And yet, this journey is not without its challenges. There will be moments of discomfort, of resistance, of doubt. There will be times when the shadow feels overwhelming, when the temptation to turn away is almost irresistible. But in those moments, remember this: the shadow is not your enemy. It is your teacher. It is the part of you that knows your deepest truths, your greatest potential, your most authentic self. So, what now? What do you do with this realization? The answer is simple, though not easy: live with it. Carry it with you, not as a burden, but as a guide. Let it remind you of who you are, of what you're capable of the life you're meant to live. Let it challenge you, inspire you, transform you. The shadow will always be there, following you wherever you go. But now, instead of running from it, you can walk beside it. You can look it in the eye and say, "I see you. I accept you. I am you." And in that moment, you will find something you've been searching for all along: freedom. The question is, will you take that step? Will you turn and face the shadow, not as an adversary, but as an ally? And if you do, what kind of life might you create, not in spite of your shadow, but because of it? The choice is yours. The shadow is waiting.